Bismillah wa salatu wassalam ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another episode of the Middle West podcast. I'm your host, Taqib Musa, and I'm joined by my co-host, Asad Hussain.
Assalamu alaikum.
And Jahangir.
Assalamu alaikum.
With no last name because, you know, Dave from the government can't find you if he doesn't know your last name.
Wow.
And we're joined today by a very special guest in our studio, if you can call this a studio, with a very special guest, Mohsin Patel.
Assalamu alaikum.
Mohsin's from IslamicFinanceGuru.com. He's one of the two founders, him and Ibrahim Khan. And we're hopefully going to do both of you. We're going to do you back to back, but unfortunately the London thing didn't work out because getting into London is really hard.
Yeah, indeed. Whereas getting into Cheetham Mill Road is not quite as difficult.
No, it's really not. Nobody was here.
Well, at 6:30.
Where in London are you based?
I'm not based in London.
No, like the podcast, if you do it.
Oh, so it's just based wherever Ibrahim needs to be based. So
Okay.
Yeah,
like,
so we were going to do it at Abdus Samia's office.
Oh, were we?
Yeah.
Okay.
but yeah, London logistically is just more difficult, and this timing is perfect as well. So we're here.
So, you know, you say the timing is perfect, okay. Alhamdulillah, we got Fajr together, which is really nice and a really blessed way to start. And of course, you know, kudos to you for reviving that sunnah. But you emailed me back at 3:30 a.m. So what is this monk sleep? Do you like sleep an hour and a half and then go back? And
I think what I would say is that my schedule is a strange one. I try to sleep as little as possible.
Okay.
I think that I made that conscious decision at university, where I don't know. One day I was like, I'm just sleep too much. It's just a waste of time. And I know that flies in the face of all scientific evidence and everything that is, common kind of knowledge about sleep. But I think it also just depends on you and your body, and you often know your body quite well. So my habit, generally speaking, is to try and wake up as early as possible. So that is usually, ideally, between kind of 5 and 6.
then you sleep between 3 and 4.
No, I mean, usually I'm asleep by 1.
Okay.
By 12 or 1. But there's just a few things going on at the moment. So
Okay. Well, appreciate that one of those things is the podcast.
So, on average, how many hours would you actually sleep a day?
I try and get between 5 and 6.
Okay.
But what I do is have a bit of a catch-up sleep, maybe at the end of a week or something.
Yeah.
Where I get kind of regular.
Do you have a nap in the day?
Sorry?
Have a nap in the day?
I wish I could have a nap in the day.
Like a power nap?
I wish I could have a nap.
Qaylula.
Clean.
I think my wife often complains that so I don't have a nap if I'm busy, obviously, because that's a bit rude. But if I'm at home or I'm at my parents or something and we're just kind of sat around, I've been told it's not unusual for me to, have a little siesta. But
Just sitting there in the middle of a conversation.
I was just talking to you.
Yeah, your conversation was that boring that I just dozed off. But yeah, I mean, look, I think that there's a lot of benefit to waking up early. I think that, I'm, to be honest, saying all of that, I'm as guilty as anyone else of not getting up early enough and not being as productive early enough as I could be. But what I've found historically is that I tend to work better in the morning. And I tend to find that my best work is in the morning as well. So I think, in an ideal world, if the corporate world were this way inclined, my ideal work day would be something like 6 a.m. to 1 p.m.
No, you should join engineering then, because we have at most engineering or manufacturing offices, we do 7 to 3:30.
Okay.
And you can come in earlier if you want. So
Right.
I have a couple of people in my office who work 6 to 2:30.
Nice.
And if you need to go to the bank or something before 5.
Yeah. You've just got a bit of time to do it.
Basically, you finish your work day and you've still got 8 hours of the day left.
Well, this is it, because you're going to get up for the thing that you need to do anyway, and then by the time you've finished, instinctively you would think, I've not had enough sleep, so I'm going to go to sleep. But in reality, that's not what happens. What actually happens is you feel quite energized, and you think, like you just said, I've got 8 hours of my day left. I'm going to go and do X, Y, and Z. And I often had this thought. So when I left uni, I started teaching. And I often had this thought then that, why is the school day structured like this. Admittedly, it would be quite difficult on kids to get them up at 5 a.m. to get them ready for a 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. start. But it would be interesting, I think, to have a 7 a.m. to 1 p.m. school day.
Well, that's growing up in the Gulf, we would start at 7:15, finish at 1:10 or 1:50, depending on what year you're in. But I think here it's more practical for a corporate, because if you're working 9 to 5 and your kids happen to be in school 9 to 4 or whatever,
correct, yeah,
that's perfect, because in corporate slavery, all the way, you're a great capitalist slave for the system. So what about the health implications? Like, do you worry about that, or do you like force your wife to sleep like 5 hours as well? Do you wake her up in the middle of the night?
No, I don't impose my lifestyle on anybody else. As much as I've tried to, it's not been possible.
Because there's if you read about like Imam Nawawi and some of those back in the day shuyukh where there's stuff they say about them that they'd only sleep when their head hit the wall on the other side of the desk. Yeah. And then Maududi, where I was reading something from his wife or something, where she said that he was starting to lose his eyesight because he would sleep so little. There's health implications to that.
I'm sure there are. I think in terms of I've not really thought about the health implications. I mean, I've thought about it to the extent that, as I said earlier, me sleeping not very much flies in all the face of scientific evidence. But I think my way of, countering that is, like I said, just listening to my body. And I think, to be fair, most practitioners will tell you as well that there isn't really a substitute for that as well. And I think that given that my best work is in the morning, it's just a really useful time for me to get up. So, alhamdulillah, I think I try and do it as much as possible. It's something that I'll continue to try to do. It's like a life's effort, isn't it? And if you know that there's a good habit to be had, then you should try and pursue that. And not least because, it means that you can do things like pray tahajjud, especially in the winter months. It means things that you can pray fajr in jama'ah and stuff like that, which, I'm really bad at, frankly. And so, I think we should...
How does that work for you in Ramadan? Because Ramadan, especially on a weekend nowadays, with Ramadan in the summer, I try to wake up as late as possible.
Ramadan. It's like Tarawih back home, I can't remember now, about midnight, 1 o'clock, something like that. Yeah. I tend to do suhoor at that time and go to sleep. So in a way, it sort of reflects my normal day. But Ramadan is Ramadan, isn't it? It's an exception, and you've got to. Yeah,
although there's a lot to be. I thought we'd have gotten to Islamic Finance Guru by now. Still discussing sleep
10 minutes
habits.
just speaking about speak.
Speaking about speak, or
all right, sorry, I'm just half asleep at the moment. You just expect me to come out with words properly. Speaking about sleep.
Because I was expecting Asad to jump in there, because sometimes you call him at 1:30 in the morning and 1:30 p.m. And he's like, just rolled out.
I'm a student. Yeah, I'm allowed to do that.
I think you graduated.
I'm not graduated yet. No, I'm graduated December.
Oh, so till then you're just moping around. Then.
I'm not doing anything. I've submitted everything, my dissertation, and everything, but I'm still a student technically, so I get to enjoy the luxuries of being a student.
Yes.
Okay.
No comment.
I guess we're all students in the student of life. But in your day job, when you're awake, or part of the time when you're awake, you're doing corporate law.
Correct. Yeah.
And I tried to read like your firm's description and stuff, and it says they're a full services international global firm global law firm that connects the government, the legal, and I was like,
what's going on here?
Yeah,
it's all of us.
That's his expertise there, isn't it? His degrees
international
in
law
international
management,
law,
criminal something or other.
Yeah. So. To break that down quite simply, we act for usually kind of big business or funds and stuff like that. So I'm specifically a corporate lawyer, which means that I work on transactions usually, and I chose to qualify into that because that's what my interest is. Working on kind of big, interesting deals. So
like mergers, acquisitions, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So we do. I guess you could split it up into three broad types of deals. So you've got your standard M&A that you just referred to, mergers and acquisitions. An example would be one company in a particular industry buying or merging with another one. So theoretically,
Nestle bought Roundtree or something.
Exactly, yeah, something like that. So that's your standard kind of M&A. We also do a lot of private equity work. I don't know if you guys or your audience will be familiar with what private equity is, but essentially these are funds, and funds are a collection of money from investors. And private equity is basically these funds are buying chunks of existing profitable businesses that they think they can help to grow, whether that's because the business is growing full stop and just needs an injection of capital, or whether that's they can add some particular contacts or knowledge to that business so that their bottom line can grow. And these funds, what they do is they'll invest. So let's say it's a 50 million quid investment, and they're buying, 20% of the company. What they will try to do is grow the bottom line, which is the net profit, to a point where in 5, 7 or less years they can exit that investment, either to another private equity fund or some sort of other exit. For example, it could be that company floats on the stock market, and so on and so forth.
So how's that different to what venture capital firms do?
So venture capital is the third thing that I was going to get onto, which is also some of the work that I do.
Okay.
So venture capital specifically is, whereas private equity firms are investing in kind of usually quite big, profitable, growing businesses in quite established places, venture capital is essentially, think of it as the startup world and investing in the startup world. So you've got, in the same way that I described private equity funds, where they've got a collection of money from investors, you've also got venture capital funds who have a collection of money from investors. But the purpose of that is to invest in startups and disruptive startups of varying stages. Different funds will go in at different points, but broadly speaking, they're all investing in startups. And venture capital is very different because, broadly speaking, they're taking a lot more risk, and they're probably getting a lot more reward from the successful ones. So if you think about it in terms of private equity, they won't really think about failure too much. Everything's,
Yeah, so they get like 1,000 failures and...
Yeah, it's like the private equity guys who are investing in these big businesses, by and large, won't fail in an investment. Everything's quite comfortable and de-risked, and they'll do enough due diligence to make sure that it's, nothing bad is really going to happen here.
I was just going to ask about due diligence. So how do you due diligence a startup? Because...
Yeah, okay. So, sorry, just to finish my last point. So whereas private equity funds are quite de-risked in terms of their investment, venture capital funds are... completely taking a risk. And to get onto the point about due diligence. So the thing about the startup world, and I guess this is the thing that's really difficult for people to understand that are new to the industry or trying to understand the industry, is that even at the kind of sophisticated level of venture capital funds, it is kind of still a bit finger in the air. And, there are some things that you will obviously look out for. So, key things will be stuff like the team. Who are the team? Are they good? Are they credible? Have they done something before? What's their background? Yada, yada, yada. Other things, key things like what has the startup done? What traction have they got? Is there a product market fit? Is there a growth map? Has this thing got traction? It's one thing for me to sell, lemonade in a stall on Cheetah Mill Road, but can that scale into $1 billion business?
Do you think you can do it? Yeah, Cheetah Mill start
Cheetah
today.
Mill Road.
Not the $1 billion one, the lemonade on Cheetah Mill Road. A question: do you enjoy your work?
It's a good question.
Thank you.
Surprisingly profound. By that I mean that it's a lot of people talk about, do you enjoy your work? but actually when you get into the roots of it, in my specific profession, you have to understand that there are lots of people that want to get into it. There might even be listeners of this podcast who, dream of being a corporate lawyer.
Because they watched an episode of Suits or something.
Yeah, something like that. But look, I mean, it is ultimately a nice job in the sense that, I work on really exciting stuff. I work with great people.
When you say really exciting, does it excite you personally?
So the concept of it does, i.e., I'm usually working on an investment into a business, and that's very exciting for everyone involved. You sometimes you see the figures, and you'll see, for example, that on a private equity investment, often what's happening is that the original founders from way back when, they're quote unquote taking some money off the table, and this investment is a way for them to do that. And I won't go into the
What do you mean taking money off it? So taking a wage? Or?
So if you think about it in terms of, if you set up a business today and it grows massively well, and in 10 years time you've still got, let's say, 50% of the company, yes, you're taking a wage from the business because you might be working in the business and so on and so forth, but how do you actually realize the value of the 50% of your shares? That you could have a business that's making 5 million net profit a year, and in the market that business might be worth anywhere between frankly 20 and 100 million quid, depending on the type of business that you've got. And you can say, oh yeah, on paper my shares are worth 50 million quid.
Yeah.
But how do you actually realize that value? The only way you realize it is by selling. Now, what if you don't want to exit the business? So when private equity investment comes in, one of the things that happens in the background is that sometimes, not always, but sometimes the founders are taking a bit of cash out and realizing some of the value of their shares through that investment. So from my point of view as a lawyer, it's exciting to see stuff like that, because these are just ordinary Joes usually who started something, had an idea, did something really well, executed really well, built a big business over 10, 15 years or whatever it is, and now's the time that they get to see those millions and enjoy.
Because it's a crazy, like, if you just keep working in your kind of day job without ever doing a startup, which is what most people will do, probably over your lifetime you'll earn $1 million, $2 million in a standard kind of decent job, teacher, engineer, whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas startups seem to, especially the really big ones. Like,
Yeah.
I was reading about WeWork, and that's what I thought you meant by exiting cap, because apparently the founder had taken $590 million in licensing for the WeWork name.
590 million.
Yeah, so he took basically, because they just threw cash at them because they were put up by SoftBank,
right?
Which is they have this big $100 billion vision fund that Saudi government put a lot of money in, like the Saudi pension fund, or the is it PIF or something that they're starting up with the sale of Aramco, and they'll make the biggest one. But they threw so much money at them that the business had so much money that he took that much money for, and then he returned it back, and he took stock options and things. Like, it's just crazy amount of money, and then the IPO failed, and now everyone's like,
now what?
Yeah.
So I should differentiate between private equity, which is what I'm kind of referencing before, and venture capital and startups. So in the startup world, you're right. Obviously, you've got founders who'll be working like crazy initially, and then at some point down the line, they'll be able to either sell their business or sell some of their shares or whatever. The WeWork example is an interesting one because a lot of people are pointing to it as an example of really inflated valuations in the private market that get completely scrutinized when it comes to IPO, i.e. in front of public investors, because public investors just don't match up on those startup valuations in the private world. And broad brush thinking on that is that there's a lot of money nowadays. There's a lot of money floating around in the private world. That means that startups can get very high valuations.
When you say there's a lot of money floating now, is that because there's big funds trying to do venture capital, or is it because the economy has been really good for so long?
So probably a mixture. So the thing now is that venture capital. So if you think about the stuff we see around us now, so you might go home in an Uber. I suspect you won't, but you might go home in an Uber. You might have a bit of a lazy day, and tonight you might order your food through Just Eat, or maybe even Uber Eats. And those were one day kind of, small team in a bedroom type startups that grow, and they've had massive success, and they've got to valuations which have been hugely successful for early investors. Literally, I mean, I don't know the exact figures, but I imagine, I tend to imagine actually what early investors in Uber have actually made. It's probably something completely ridiculous, like, I don't know, if you invested 10 grand, you'd probably be a multi-millionaire, I would imagine. So those are the kinds of returns you can get on, quote-unquote, betting on these startup companies early doors and giving them some fuel for growth.
I think you guys have talked, because you mentioned betting, so I kind of have another tangent I want to go off on, but let's do this tangent first. Without making anyone too angry. But you said the betting thing. So a lot of people say this about stock markets, and I think it's been a traditional opinion that's largely been in practice mooted, because most Muslims will trade on the stock market. But there are a lot of kind of fears that, especially if you're just throwing money in because you don't really know what's going on. You just go, oh, look, Tesla, throw money. Which is how a lot of people do investment, right? You just get one of those like trading 212 apps or something, and you go, hey, I've got $50, throw it at this. How much of that is, do you think, kind of a little bit like gambling? Or because a lot of people get, like, I've spoken to people who are investing, and the guy was doing foreign exchange trades, and I was like, that's leveraged, which is very kind of a controversial way of doing business. Or they'll buy futures. They don't understand that it was futures in Tesla rather than equity in Tesla that they bought. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, on that point, you're right. Not a lot of people actually understand the mechanics of what is going on when you buy, for example, a CFD or a future or whatever it is. That's some of the stuff that we try to cover on Islamic Finance Guru, where we actually explain some of this stuff, so that you actually understand that, unless you're actually buying equity in the company, then this isn't an instrument that would be permissible.
But even if equity, if you're just throwing stuff around, is it a little bit like gambling?
To get to that point, I mean, I'm not sure I have a view on just kind of throwing money around and how that equates Islamically to gambling or not, to be honest with you. But I think from a commercial point of view, it obviously doesn't make sense to be just throwing money around, because if you're going to do that, you might as well give it to me.
Me.
Well, what about
from Saudi Arabia? So he's got the cash for it.
What about index funds, which basically they just invest in everything, or the top 500?
Yeah. So that's a more sensible approach. It's the sort of boring approach that you should be taking. My thinking on investing, particularly in the stock market, is the more boring it is, the more probably sensible it is. But going on to the Sharia, there's a Sharia compliance issue with that, because if you're investing in an index fund, which, as you said, so if you invest in, for example, a FTSE 100 index fund that then invests into the FTSE 100, you've got an issue in terms of Sharia compliance, because you don't know how many of the FTSE 100 are indeed permissible or not. So, there's some due diligence to do on our part as Muslims, and we just have to be really cognizant of that. So, there are things happening now. So, for example, Wahid Investors has come online, and that's been an enabler for ordinary Muslims to invest. But I think, at Islamic Finance Guru, one of the things that we're quite keen on is really empowering people to make their own decisions. That's why we've got, a stock screening course, for example. It's why we've got an article that explains the whole methodology behind it. Because really, my ideal would be that everyone could be comfortable just analysing a company for Sharia compliance and understanding that, I can invest in this or I can't invest in
And I
this.
think you guys have a bit of asset compliance and things like that. Because I've not looked into Syria because, as much as these guys might make fun of, I'm just going to get burgled now. But actually, I use Trading 1212, which gives you like $50,000 of virtual money.
That's the practice account, isn't it? So you start with the practice account and then you start trading.
Yeah.
Nobody knows how to use that practice account. You start like, ooh, big numbers, and trading there, £50,000.
Yeah, it just feels really exciting. You throw $20,000 into Tesla, and then and you go, yes.
Yeah, I think. Presumably you're doing that just for fun.
Well,
or?
I'm doing it for fun, but I assume at work that's what you actually do.
At work. No.
He's a lawyer. He's not. He's not a banker. He's just on Wall Street.
No, you do the law bit of someone doing, because this is what I imagine is this is what rich people are doing in their penthouses, right? They're just sitting in this nice fancy apartment, just going, oh,
20,000 to Tesla.
I think you'd probably be surprised. In terms of a law job, that's we're working on the actual deals themselves, if that makes sense. So it's not strictly that kind of thing. But yeah, going back to your point about practice accounts and stuff, I think my feeling is always that if you're serious about investing properly or wanting to start investing, then the first step a lot of people take is to do this kind of practice account thing. And I think that's probably right to a point. But the problem with practice accounts is that investing is, a lot of it is just about psychology, i.e., have I got the patience to really endure this investment? So, let's say you stuck some money in Tesla. Let's assume it's halal and we've done all the checks, and you've gone on islamicfinanceGuru.com and you've really understood how to do this, and you do it. You analyze Tesla. And
I must compliment your smooth plugging.
You go on islamicfinanceGuru.com.
It's like subconsciously getting in every time. And you invest, and the psychology bit comes in when your Tesla shares start tanking 10%, then 20%, then 30%, and then you're like, oh, what do I do?
Then it's time.
Psychologically, you foresee a decline. You think, I might as well pull out now.
You do istikhara.
Yeah.
It's probably a good shout. I think istikhara, by the way, is like really underestimated and often misunderstood. I think you probably should do istikhara, frankly. I think that's a good point. But there's a really good book, by the way, that I'd recommend on this exact topic called The Art of Execution.
I thought it was going to be on istikhara.
If there is a good book on istikhara, then let me know. But yeah, The Art of Execution, which is basically this dude gives, I forgot his name, but he gives, I think it's 10 or 20 fund managers. So these are guys that are, top of their game, fund managers. They do it for a profession, managing money. And he gives them, I think, 2 million each or something. And he says that you can invest in basically whatever you want. But the only caveat is that it has to be your very best ideas. So what you often find with funds is that just for the sake of having a lot of eggs in the basket, they will be investing in, 500 companies. And actually, when you think about it, what possibly can you benefit from having 500 companies in a portfolio? Like, are you genuinely saying that the 500th company you choose you're as convinced as the first company you chose, or are you doing it just because of diversity and trying to avoid risk? So this guy says, you can only invest in your best ideas, and you must stick to it, and you must have like real conviction about these things. And then so he gives them this money, and it's all about analysing what they do after the investment. So if it falls, what do you do? And
is this a thought experiment you did?
It's a real experiment.
It's a real experiment.
Yeah.
How much did you give him?
I think it was 2 million.
See, I told you this is what rich people do. They sit around throwing money at this place.
Here's some money, go invest.
So what he found, I'm probably misremembering some detail, but I remember the key bit, which is that the ones who were the most successful were the ones who aggressively and methodically just sold.
Sold.
Wait, so what do you mean? Like they just sold off their... So they didn't stick to their...
They didn't stick. They methodically sold at a rule. So, their rule might have been, if my shares go down 20%, I automatically sell. And I don't get emotional about it, and it is what it is. I mean, it's not a position I necessarily agree with, but this is the data that he presented. There was another group who aggressively doubled down on that position. So they would say, okay, my Tesla shares are down 50%, fantastic. It means I can buy more shares at a cheaper price. And that lowers your average price, of course. And
very optimistic, isn't it?
Sorry?
It's very optimistic, isn't it?
It's optimistic, but if you're buying shares, then shouldn't you be really convinced about your research? And everything else should just be noise, would be the argument that, one day the market will realise that I'm right.
Because you bet on this company because you think this company is so great.
Exactly. So you'll have had a thesis about investing in this particular company, and okay, if the share price moves up or down in the meantime, then so be it. Because what is share price? It's just
you're betting on yourself, basically. There isn't.
In a sense, yeah, you're betting on your conviction.
Well, so there's a podcast called Planet Money, and I think they did a thing about index funds versus some of the best hedge funds.
Yeah.
And basically what they were saying was, yes, some of the best hedge funds will do better returns. And kind of stories that come to mind are things because hedge funds can do other things as well. So actually, I'm not sure if this is Sharia compliant, but there's that documentary called The Big Short where some guy saw the financial crisis coming and he made like $2 billion.
I was just going to mention The Big Short. That's a great example of conviction.
There's a lot of confusion in that movie, isn't there?
I think the consensus is that shorting is not permissible, by the way. But maybe we'll cover that in some detail on the website at some point.
Yes. But yes, so some of the index funds. So, for example, like there's the Dow Jones Islamic Titans Index Fund. So there's a group of scholars have sat there and vetted, or been paid off to say that each.
I like you raise your eyebrows. I was just paid off to say.
Well, so I did a lot of research into this because we have a pension fund that tracks that, and some of the guys at work wouldn't agree that it's Sharia compliant. So I went into kind of the lives of each of these shuyukh, and at the end of it I did end up defending them, but when I was going through and I was like, look, this guy's on 83 boards of finance things, right? And
this means he's an expert. Huh?
Well, okay, but also he has a lot of money, so surely the motivation is there. Of course you assume because he's a sheikh everything's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a separate discussion. I think that my personal view is that you have to take that at face value. The fact that he's on 83 boards is probably indicative of the fact that there are so few
people out there,
out there with expertise,
with the relevant expertise. And it's one of those things. Once you become known for something, it's generally the work does come to you.
Surely, if someone's relying on you as much as that, so 83 boards, then you are in a position to kind of abuse the kind of power you've been given.
Yeah, but I think the optimistic side of me would say that if you're on 83 boards and you're a practicing Muslim and a learned Muslim, then you understand the responsibility.
With a yacht. You're a practicing Muslim with a yacht.
Yeah,
praying 5 times a day on a yacht.
You can do Salah on your yacht, right?
International waters.
Just travel 83 kilometers between every Salah time.
But yeah, so I think that you'd have to take at face value that they understand their responsibility and so on. And yeah, my view on that sort of thing is to take it basically at face value.
Surely, if you're going to be doing your due diligence with investments, then what about the people who are telling you the investment's halal? It's further down the line you find out that something has been going on. You're going to kick yourself in the foot and say, I should have looked into it deeper.
Okay,
like Thaqib did, researching their entire lives, looking at the amount of boards they're on.
Yeah. So I think that, there's an element of that. I wouldn't disagree with that. It's not something that I personally would do as long as I know them to be reputable at quite a high level, I guess. I don't think I'd dig down too much. I'd probably just take it at face value. that might be the wrong approach. I think
you could do a sample with your, because you said that one of the things Islamic Finance Guru is teaching is how you can vet a company. So what you could do is you could do a kind of a random sampling of the Dow Jones Islamic Titans Index, and then
that's a good point.
Then you can put stamp on Islamic Finance Guru approved.
Approves.
Approved by Thaqib, eh?
Well, approved by Mohsin Patel.
Gold star.
It's not a bad shout, actually.
No one cares why I approve. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just throwing $20,000 at Tesla.
20,000 fake dollars.
Practice dollars.
But yeah, I mean, the problem with that is that I might be setting a precedent for questioning the scholars. So yeah, I might be on dangerous waters.
What is your? I guess so. I guess a lot of people come into kind of different approaches, and I think if you kind of look at the kind of broad schools of thought or approaches in Islamic thought right now, broadly speaking, you've got some of the traditionalists who are very pro scholars, even if and it comes out a lot in politics and stuff. But then you've got kind of more Salafi-leaning people who are like, no, we should question the scholars, and kind of and then you've got kind of modernists who are. So where do you see yourself? And did you undertake any formal Sharia training to be confident in doing this?
So the answer to the last question is no, beyond having kind of interest in deen and knowledge generally. My approach to scholarship, interesting question. I don't think I have like a formal position. I think my view is that there are some really good scholars, and there are some
Really not so good.
Well, you said it. And I think it kind of goes back to what you said earlier about just having the judgment, I guess, on whose opinion and the strength of that opinion to take. I think that there are some kind of undisputed kings in terms of the scholarship of Islam and stuff like that. So that sort of thing goes undisputed. But when it comes to and I guess it probably falls more in the kind of local arena where there's less scrutiny, there's more propensity for I guess a following, where if you question a particular person or a particular scholar in the locality, it's like doomsday kind of thing.
Yeah, you shot the king.
Yeah, so
now you got to pay for it.
Exactly. So that, I think, in terms of scholarship, that's the sort of thing that I'm quite wary of. And we've all kind of seen it before, and I'm sure your audience have as well. So I think that's the extent to which I'm quite wary. But where you've got kind of really undisputed people who are very, very learned and have written extensively and done extensive things and so on and so forth, then I am, I don't have any reason to be too cynical of that, I don't think.
Okay, and did you kind of because it takes a lot of confidence to start a website, which is of course you have a background in finance, but did you feel like, did you go into some Sharia training, or do you even think it's necessary? Because actually, in a lot of fields, the experience of being in there is probably more important.
So I think of the two of us, Ibrahim is the one with the formal Sharia training and so on and so forth, and he's definitely the one that.
What does Ibrahim do as well?
He's a corporate lawyer as well.
Is he same firm?
No, different firm, but he's a funds lawyer.
Okay.
So
is he your peer though now?
Yeah, exactly. He's he's got a following of all of Islamic Finance Guru's audience. So yeah. But no. So he's the one with the kind of with the formal Sharia training. I've done an Islamic finance qualification and stuff like that, and I get stuff to a certain point. But I'm very careful of not, going beyond my station, if you like. So it might be something that I undertake in the future. But I think, the point with Islamic Finance Guru is that there are some things that are really quite fundamentally basic to understand that not many people actually get. So, we were discussing earlier that, CFD or a future is not a permissible instrument to invest in. That's not a giant leap to take. So there are certain things that are so fundamentally basic that Muslims need to know about, and frankly, there's loads of that stuff, and so that's a lot of the thinking. And then when it comes to the more kind of complex stuff and where we might take a view on things, I very much leave that to Ibrahim because I don't want to be in the firing line.
So when you do take a view on these complex issues that are not just straightforward,
Yeah.
do you do it from opinion drive from your own kind of?
Well, that'd be a question for Ibrahim, but yeah.
So you never get involved in that at all?
So I'll push him and I'll challenge him on a view that if he's going to, especially if it's a controversial one. But ultimately, he's the one with more Islamic training than me.
He really is the peer, isn't he? IFG peer.
Do you guys have a or any plans to set up like a because Qalam has a Sharia panel, Qalam Sharia board or something, and they kind of issue kind of statements based on that,
like
so
consulting.
Yeah, so do you guys have like a IFG Sharia compliance certificate / panel of
probably not in the traditional way, where, like you said, it's kind of consultancy based approach. Probably not, I don't think. Who knows? I mean, things change and things evolve all the time. But I think the thing that we would be focused on really is actually getting to grips with whatever it is that we're reviewing, and for the purposes of our audience, saying that, we've looked at this and we think there's this particular problem with it, or this bit of it is really good, and so on and so forth, rather than, because the traditional consultancy approach is where you're paid by the company, and you're instructed to kind of come up with a structure or something that works, and then you say, yeah, this is approved, and then that company gets to say where Sharia approved. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't rule it out in the same way that I wouldn't rule pretty much anything out, but I think that our focus would probably be a more kind of consumer-facing thing, whereby we've gone in on the back end and really understood a business or a product or a service or whatever it is, and then given our opinion on it.
It's a lot more personal than.
Yeah, that's what we try to do. So we see ourselves as kind of on the side of our audience. We sit with our audience.
Because a lot of the advice is given on the site, and it's quite practical, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you're not really advising how companies should do things, but how people should interact with Sharia finances.
100%, and that's what our ethos really is, in terms of we want to empower people to be able to do all of these things, because the world of finance is, generally speaking, not very well understood by people, full stop, let alone Muslims. But then Muslims have this additional problem of
not understanding it, and then not understanding it more.
Exactly, because we've got this particular layer that we have to peel behind again. So we've always tried to be really, really practical about whatever we do, and that's why we set the website up in the first place. Because on one hand, you've got these really simple fatawa websites: is this haram? Is this halal? And they don't necessarily understand the complexity.
A lot of them, yeah. If you read the simple ones, so like Islam QA, for example, like Sheikh Salih Munajjid and his students, they'll give an answer to an issue, but a lot of the times they won't understand the complexities and the considerations within the certain field they're talking about.
Yeah, and it's not due to kind of a maliciousness or something on their part. I'm sure their intentions are good, but I think that fundamentally, unless you're really entrenched in the world of finance and commerce and stuff like that, there are just some nuances that you might not get. And on the other hand, you've got these really complex kind of like fiqh texts, often in Arabic or whatever, that your average Muslim, especially in the UK or the US or whatever it is, can't really digest and doesn't have the time to digest. So we kind of write for that audience in the middle, which is pretty much, guys like all of us, who are, young, professional to a point.
I'm professional.
I mean, you're still a student, aren't you?
Well, I'm in this kind of limbo at the moment. So I finished my undergrad, then I started my master's. I submit my disso September. So
is
now
that the technical term,
dissertation? so from September till December now, I've got this kind of 2-3 month period where I'm just doing nothing, well, working and look for jobs, etc. But
all right, fair enough.
And queuing up at job seekers.
Yeah,
Taking-
universal credit. But I'm still a student technically because I'm graduated yet.
So you still get the bus discounts, basically.
Still get this bus discounts, the Spotify discounts, all of it.
MashaAllah.
Yeah, it's nice. It's nice.
Good.
Until it finishes, but
Yeah.
then
Exactly.
after.
I forgot my point. Oh yeah, so we write for the audience that is kind of intellectually curious but wants practical advice at the end of it, and wants to read not just like something really straightforward, but actually something that's quite considered. And yeah, that's what I think our audience takes benefit from.
Because a lot of the advice that you give is not just, like you said, just straightforward. It's kind of conversational.
It is,
You say
yeah.
you try to challenge Ibrahim on a lot of things.
Yeah.
So it's back and forth, and to an extent, it answers a lot of the questions that some people might have.
Yeah.
So if someone's reading a basic, straightforward piece of text, give you an answer to something, a lot of the questions won't be answered because it'll just be a page of this is what it is and that's how it is.
Yeah.
But IFG, the way they do it is, you do it.
Yeah.
It's. I think it's quite.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. And I think that there are some really critical issues facing people just on an everyday basis that are such easy wins from our point of view to correct behaviour. So classic example is workplace pensions, right? Like, think about all Muslims in work across the UK. They're probably they have to all be enrolled in a workplace pension. If they've opted out, that's something different. Now, how many of those do you think are checking where their money is invested? Do they understand that the money that they put into this pension goes to an institution that then invests that money via a fund, and is that thing underlying? Are those companies underlying that fund Sharia compliant?
Almost always bonds, isn't it? Because that's the safest option.
Well, I think it depends on what option you go for. So what you'll find usually with pension providers is they'll give you an option, a bit like when you sign up to Wahid Invest or whatever, you get like an aggressive or a moderate or whatever. So you'll often have that with workplace pension providers, and you'll say, "Oh, I'm adventurous" or something like that because I'm quite young. And the way they'll phrase it is that if you're young or whatever, then you should probably go for this bit, and if you're quite old and near retirement, then you should go for a more cautious approach. And the reason for that is the stock market is more volatile than the kind of bond market, as you mentioned. So the older you get, the more kind of weighting you've got towards bonds. But leaving that question aside, let's assume for a second that the funds are all invested in the stock market, for example.
Does the person get the choice of doing that though?
To do what?
If you're saying that everybody in the UK who's working has to be part of this kind of pension fund within their workplace. Do they have the choice of choosing then where the investment goes?
Well, this is what I'm about to get onto. Okay. So the first point is that you have to enrol by law, and then if you opt out, you can do that. But then I suspect that most people don't actually check where their money is then invested. There's probably a percentage of people that don't compute or don't understand that their money is going to be invested. They probably just think, I put this money in, my employer puts some money in, and
every day someone just puts £1 in there.
Yeah, like something like that. When I'm 65 or 67 or whatever the retirement age is going to be, by the time I retire, I'll just end up with whatever pot of money it is, and it's all hunky-dory. So people just don't understand that. And then of the people that understand that their money is invested, do they actually understand that they need to make sure that what they're invested in is halal? And if they do understand that, do they understand how to make the changes? And you'd be surprised how easy and difficult it is. It's difficult in the sense that I've had previous experience with, I think it was, Scottish widows, who, when I rang up and I was like, look, I'm enrolled in the workplace pension, have you got a Sharia compliant fund in which I can change my investment? And they just completely didn't know what I was talking about, which is shocking, really. And then
although they do, because
they do one.
Yeah.
But long story short, she kind of put me on hold for ages, and she was like, "Oh yeah, I've been told we do an ethical fund." And I was like, "Okay, so let me just explain this a little bit to you, because it wasn't her fault that she didn't get it. But I said, ethical is one element, I guess you can call it that, of it being Sharia compliant, but it's not everything, because an ethical fund will just look at, does this company invest in arms, or is this company an
Exploiting
arms
kids.
company, or that would be an extreme example, wouldn't it?
Would it really?
for a listed company.
Although that's an interesting because
A lot of them do, though.
No, because Apple had to like shut down one of its factories or something because actually they were employing child labor. Although Apple had done their due
they're
diligence.
not exporting kids, though.
Exploiting us. Like,
Oh, exploiting.
you thought human trafficking or something.
I thought you said exporting kids.
Right, yeah.
That'd be
Yeah.
really cool if someone pulled that off. There's a
would it?
listed company. I mean, obviously it would be terrible.
Hello, I just want to change my investment. Yeah, this exporting kids.
Yeah, you look in the annual report. It's like our business is exporting children to.
Business is booming.
But yeah, so ethical is obviously, it means that you want to invest in companies that aren't doing these bad things like tobacco and arms and so on and so forth. And funnily enough, that's what a lot of Muslims think Sharia compliant is.
Yeah.
So they'll be like, of course it's Sharia compliant. It's just a car company. It's only Tesla. They're doing great things, but they don't understand that there are like financial metrics that you have to look at. So so I explained to this woman on the phone, and she just didn't get it. I had to get off the phone. I eventually had to go through like my HR at work to the guy that deals with the pensions, who then got in touch with his contact at Scottish Widows, who then emailed me direct and said that, yeah, we have got a fund, and it's this particular one. And I said, okay, fine, can you change my investment into
And you're
that?
the only person in it.
Well,
probably-
this is. I guess there's a couple of questions around that. Well, firstly, it becomes the whole halal tayyib argument, right? Is that the ethical fund is ethical, but I'm sure there's firms in the Sharia compliant fund which are non-ethical, because maybe BA systems have a great, debt to asset ratio and everything's fine. But would you be comfortable giving,
Because
would
a
it
lot
be
of the
ethical? Would it
considerations
be
they're made from a financial point of view,
Yeah.
and Sharia doesn't only just
doesn't only
encompass
because
Sharia,
BA systems probably Sharia compliant, and some ethical funds would say.
Yeah.
Although again, you can have a discussion on that. But also, do you think that we get put at a little bit of a disadvantage because, especially at the end of your retirement, like if you were in a Sharia compliant fund which is equity based, and of course long term your stocks rise.
Yeah.
But you started working in 1980 and you're going to retire in 2009.
Yeah.
And then along came 2008. And it's a big kind of. So do you think like when we're nearing the end of our careers, we should start moving away from stocks and throwing everything in cash? Or
So I'll answer the two questions. So one was about the whole ethical bit of Sharia compliance. So you've got, I guess, two elements of a Sharia compliant screen. One is the quantitative analysis, which is what you talked about, the whole financial stuff and those ratios. And one is the kind of qualitative analysis, which is just looking at, I guess, what you said. Is this company operating in an industry which is questionable? Do I really want to be putting my money here, purely from an Islamically ethical point of view? And on that basis, BAE systems probably, it wouldn't pass the screen on that basis, even though on the financial ratios it might be fine. You do have to consider certain things. And then to answer your...
although I've got some thoughts on that. What's wrong with weapons?
Nothing's wrong with weapons. It's how you use them.
Well, quite. And yeah, the second question about how you should change your approach as you get older, it's a good one because, the general thinking is that as you get older, you should move more into what they call fixed income products, i.e. products that give you a fixed income, as the name would suggest. But basically stuff that isn't, I guess, as volatile as stocks. The problem, as you rightly say, is that the conventional bonds are not permissible, so that you couldn't really invest in that. I've got a few thoughts on this. So one is that there are sukuk funds out there. So as an example, I think if you look at the cautious side of the Wahid portfolios, they invest in the Franklin Sukuk Fund, which you can also buy kind of separately in like an AJ Bell.
So I was asking Wahid about their lifetime ISAs and pension funds, and they don't have any yet. Which because like obviously with your work pension, I assume it's difficult for that company. Like let's say it's Scottish Widows, it's difficult for them to go into a specific to open up a Sukuk fund.
Correct. So the issue that I've got with in particular with Scottish Widows is that they only have one Sharia compliant fund, which, you know, think about it this way: if I worked all my life, would I really want all my eggs in that one basket? Of course I wouldn't. However, kind of a hack for your audience is really to kind of push that point. So I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of a SIPP, but for the benefit of your audience, a SIPP is, I don't know exactly what it stands for, but basically it's self-invested personal pension or something like that. Basically, it's your own pension account, and if you put money into there of your own like volition,
you can choose where it goes yourself.
You can choose where it goes. The government gives you tax relief on it as well, so you'll get like a 20% or whatever bonus back in.
But what about the employee contribution?
Well, that's what you lose out on. But this is the hack that I'm going to give you. So I spoke to Scottish Widows, and you should all try this with your relevant pension providers. And I said to them, look, if I want to transfer money out of my pension account into my own SIPP, A, can I do that? And B, I want to still keep my workplace pension going, i.e. I want to contribute every month and I want my employer to contribute every month. And she told me that, yes, you can. And if you leave a minimum of £2 in the workplace pension pot, then it'll just carry on as normal, and your employer won't necessarily know that, or doesn't need to know that you've transferred some of the money into your own SIPP. So what that means is that I can transfer my pension money into my SIPP, choose how that cash is then invested, and obviously I'll go to islamicfinanceguru.com first to check the.
Would you? That's nice, yeah.
to check the stocks, the halal stocks.
Well, if you would, that's probably a good sign, because it's such a good tool that even you use it all the time.
To be honest, genuinely speaking, I do.
Because you're not the only contributor, are you? Because you have Ibrahim as well. So.
Yeah, we've got Ibrahim, and yeah, so like.
Well, I tried to write an article for them about car finance, but I'm just not very good.
Well, you didn't send it, did you?
No, I didn't.
No, exactly.
I wasn't confident. I wrote it, and then I was like, "This is garbage. Throw it away."
You should have sent it.
No, I will do. I will do.
I mean,
probably was garbage, to be honest with you.
Remind me about that point, because we'll talk about something. What was I going to say? Yeah, so it's hard to find like, good collated information that's just easy to access, and that's what we need. Like, nowadays we are time poor. We just don't have time to do stuff. And so if there is a resource, even if I've created it, that I can access, that means that it's easy to look at, then I will do that, and genuinely I do. So alhamdulillah, that's maybe that's a good sign. But yeah, to get back to your point about the article that you submitted, the thing
failed to submit.
Sorry, failed to submit. Yeah, sorry, correct. Unlike your dissertation.
Well, we hope.
Something like that, yeah.
The point on that, and this is just, I guess, an encouragement to people generally, is that you should just do stuff without necessarily worrying about quality. Let me caveat that. So do stuff without worrying about quality to a point, i.e. you should always try to be very good and excel at what you do. But if the alternative is not doing it, then you should do it. Because you can always get better at stuff and you can always improve stuff, but you don't know what's going to come out of doing something imperfectly. And I guess that goes back to our conversation about startups, because if you think about startups, who in this room, so there's 4 of us here, hasn't had an idea for the next big thing? You've all had an idea for the next big thing, right? But how many of you have acted on it and done something and got some traction?
I ain't got no money, man. It's a bit broke at the moment.
Yeah, but this is why
that's the point,
you need to go to millionaires who'll give you $20,000 to...
I know, man.
No, but this is the point, that, if the idea is that good, you'll get some traction without any money.
What do you mean?
You can get started, basically.
You can get started without any money. So what I'm saying is that if the idea is that good and that disruptive and that important to society,
it probably isn't anymore. That's probably what.
Well, then that tells you this.
You're doubting yourself before you start. And what if
extremely self-critical.
There are very few businesses that can't at least get off the ground with a little bit of traction. And when you get that little bit of traction, that's the seed that you need to then perhaps go out to investors and say, look, I've done this MVP. So if you're not familiar with the concept of MVP, it's minimum viable product. So
most valuable player in the NBA.
Most valuable player, and so on.
Yeah, that's in the NBA. But in the startup world, it's a minimum viable product. And the idea, it comes from a book called The Lean Startup, which I'd also recommend. And the idea is that you should just get out there with the quickest and dirtiest thing that you can knock up, because that's what's going to give you the validation and the feedback that you need. So if you write an app, should you spend 6 months locked up refining every single little bit so that it just looks fantastic and all that stuff, or should you spend 3 days coding it, doesn't look pretty, frankly you'd be quite embarrassed presenting it, but it's functional, and it has to be the latter every single time, because when you do that and you present it, you'll get feedback from 20 people that say, oh, you should look at X, Y, and Z, or you should improve A, B, and C, and that's how you iterate, and that's how you improve, and that's how you get to a final product that, yes, you spent 6 months on, but has been the result of lots of feedback. So you've actually produced something that people want, rather than producing something that you think people want, and that's how you go about getting product market fit and all that good stuff. So, yeah, my advice generally is, and I'm as bad at this as anybody else, so this is advice to myself, is to just do stuff.
Just do it.
Just do it.
Nike.
Follow Nike's mantra and just do it.
Isn't it Nike, though?
It's not Nike, it's
Nike.
Well, is it Adidas or Adidas?
That is Adidas, actually. No, it's actually Adidas.
Oh,
because
right, yes.
Wait, no, I was
One of the
thinking-
two.
You said it with such conviction the first time.
It's Adidas because the guy was called Adidasler. Yeah.
Adidasla, like it.
He's a German.
Would your advice
Yeah.
now extend to organizations as well?
In what sense?
In the sense that there's many Muslim charities, etc.
Yeah.
So should they also be putting money in certain investment pots, etc., to
Very
actually
good
get
question.
back?
A lot of them
Great
do to make
returns.
themselves 100% donations, so that 100% of the donations go to actual charitable activities. They
Right.
start investing in businesses, so that will feed into the administration side of the charity.
Right, okay. That's
So-
interesting.
To become more self-sufficient.
Yeah,
for
self-sufficient,
mosques
isn't
and
it?
stuff like
So
that.
are you saying that should charities be like a quasi-fund and invest in companies?
Possibly.
Because that is what waqfs, like, the King Abdulaziz's waqf
yeah.
in front of them.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
they build this
100%,
hotel, they're making great
100%.
money.
So there's a really good, I say really good, that's quite self-promoting, but we did a podcast on, I forgot the episode, it's about charity, and, we have this concept of strategic charity, and, one of Ibrahim and I's big kind of like ethos is that it's all about impact, because when part of the reason we do Islamic Finance Guru is that it's all about financial prosperity of Muslims.
Yeah.
And if you increase the financial prosperity of a people, all the data suggests that good things happen to that people from a health perspective, from an education perspective, from just generally things get better for that people. And so how do you go about doing that? And one of the things that we are really good at as a community, as a Muslim community, is giving charity. But are we giving charity in the correct strategic way, or are we doing it because we want to feel good about ourselves?
Just chuck money at something.
So, it's easy probably to raise 50 grand to build wells in Africa, but is it easy to go knocking on doors and saying, hey, I want to raise 50 grand because there's these two Muslim brothers that are doing this really interesting startup that isn't necessarily Muslim facing, but if they do really well, they'll make like 500 million out of it, and they have, you know, committed to really helping our society through that. That's a much more difficult sell.
People
but the
want
reality,
direct kind of
they want that tangible feeling. But the reality is that what's more impactful? Is it the building wells in Africa, which admittedly does have an impact, or is it, you know, increasing general financial prosperity so that we can then do really strategic stuff? There's a really good documentary that I highly recommend. It's on Netflix at the moment. It's about Bill Gates.
I see, yeah.
It's called Inside Bill Gates' Mind or something.
Obviously, you've seen it because all you do all day is sit around watching
Netflix.
But anyway, Bill Gates, I think, is a really, really good example for Muslims, because I don't know if you guys are familiar with the work that Bill Gates Foundation does. But basically, I didn't know much about it until I watched the documentary. In short, he's all about fixing problems that just shouldn't exist. So, for example, lots of people die because of basic sanitation issues, often in places like India and Africa. And lots of people die, I think, especially in Africa, through polio, for example, which we've long kind of minimized and eradicated. So he's all about investing an awful lot of money into these problems, and the way he does that is basically like a business, I guess. He thinks about it really strategically. He understands that there are particular problems to those regions that you can't replicate the solution that was found in the West to somewhere like Africa. It's just not possible. So, he's got a fantastic team. He's spent a lot of money building that team. He'll throw a lot of money into the actual projects themselves. And he's all about basically eradicating these problems so that they don't exist. Now, there's a really, really good clip in the episode that I just watched, which I think was like episode 2 or 3. And he says that he showed his daughter a video of people suffering from polio. And at the end of the video, there's this girl, really sweet girl who's suffering from polio. And his daughter says, what did you do to help her, Dad? And Bill Gates says, well, kind of don't worry about that girl, but this is what we're doing at a big level. We're solving millions of people's problems. And Bill Gates was kind of narrating this and saying how, the daughter couldn't quite get that or whatever. And the interviewer stops him and says, but Bill, you've got to understand that that's not really inspiring to people. The fact that you're not relating to that one individual, but instead you're talking about the mass. Yeah. And Bill Gates kind of pauses and says, but I'm not here to inspire. I'm here to optimize, which is a really, really interesting way of thinking about it. And actually, in a sense, I think that that's what our approach to charity.
I think a lot of charities capitalize on that as well. So if you go to a charity event and play a video, it'll be a video of a girl, it'll be a scenario, and they'll give you this
very emotional,
emotional, and they'll focus on one child who they don't work for, and everyone will be attached to that child, and they start donating.
Absolutely,
because they've seen this video of that child.
100%.
But if you start showing them figures and say this is what we do,
it's
and
not
as
attractive.
It's not as attractive.
It doesn't appeal to our innate nature of. In a way, charity is a selfish act. In a way.
It's selfish, but it's also it capitalizes on the communication humans have with each other and the kind of connections we have with each other. Because I'm not going to have a connection with figures and facts as much as I'm going to have with a person.
Yeah.
And that's what charities they've kind of glamorized that aspect a lot now as well.
Yeah.
A lot of charities make movies about so there was one charity recently who made a movie about the Myanmar situation, and they kind of focused in on this, not the entire situation. I made a documentary, but a particular family, and they followed that family throughout their journey from Myanmar to Bangladesh.
Yeah.
And people can empathize with that, and they start donating. So I think it can be used in a positive way.
I agree.
But ultimately, people they like investing. Not investing is the wrong term. They like donating to things that make them feel better.
Yeah, and we like, as a people, as humans, we like stories as well.
Yeah,
and stories are by their nature individual.
I guess there's a lot of kind of different avenues that I want to go down. But I am aware that we need to wrap up. So maybe we'll have to hold some of our questions, especially about your languages degree.
You got a languages degree?
Yeah.
There you go.
How many degrees did you have?
Just one.
Exactly.
Well, you did,
how do you go from languages to finance?
Wait, you're a lawyer?
Yeah.
Did you do LLB?
No.
So you did the GDL?
Yeah.
Are you like Mike Ross? Did you like
snuck in? So I know about that, yeah.
No, you do a conversion.
You did the GDL, okay.
Did the GDL and then the LPC, and the good thing about applying to the kind of top firms is that they'll pay for all that. So I often advise anyone that wants to come into law, specifically corporate law at the top firms, is don't do a law degree, because why would you?
It's too late now, isn't it?
You did the languages degree at Oxford, and I think that's. I kind of think that a lot of us kind of think that we should go down a stable route and do engineering law, medicine, accountancy, whatever. And while of course it's good for being stable and kind of minimizing your risks, but ultimately if you wanna make the big bucks,
the moolah,
then and it's not just that. If you want to do something you're passionate, like if you're passionate about engineering, great, do that. Nobody cares about the money, because you'll be happy and you'll do something great, and then you'll do a...
What made you want to go into law from languages?
Languages sound so much more interesting.
It is interesting.
What languages were they like?
So I did
Greek
French and Russian.
Okay.
Oh, can you speak French and Russian?
I can.
Oh, that's nice, isn't it?
I mean,
my Russian is not that good.
You can pass off as a Russian, so
You probably could. I was thinking that just now,
if you ever get into a fight or something, just
start screaming in Russian.
I suspect I might get hounded by hooligans in Russia. But anyway, what was the point I was going to say? The point I was going to say was actually picking up on your point about you should do what makes you happy. It's not something I necessarily agree with from a university or potentially even a job point of view. It depends, I guess, what you want out of life. If you are intending to work in a kind of corporate job or whatever all your life, then I guess, to a point, you do need to make sure that you are happy doing that. I think what happened with me was that I think especially after I got married or was about to get married, and definitely after I had kids, I think my outlook just became a lot more pragmatic. And honestly, I went into corporate law for the money.
Yes.
See, most people do though, don't they? No one goes in and says, "I was so passionate about helping big companies get even more richer." No one says that. It's always about wanting to become rich yourself, and it's not bad to say that.
So I think you're completely right, but I think that it doesn't start there. So I think most people, lawyers are conservative, boring people fundamentally, and they are often, I guess, geekish enough early doors to be like, I really want to be a lawyer, and they'll do a law undergrad and whatever, and then you kind of then it's about what path you take. Do you go into corporate law? Do you go into other types of law? Do you do whatever? And generally speaking, if you've got good academics and you want to make a bit of money, then you are going to end up in corporate law. So I think you're right. Nobody goes in saying I'm really passionate about helping big businesses get even richer. But you just kind of end up looking for jobs, obviously in law because you generally wanted to be a lawyer. But then it's about what's going to make me kind of intellectually curious and what's exciting to work on, and I guess a lot of it is a bit of ego as well.
Even myself. So when I did my undergrad, I think 80%.
Did you do a law undergrad?
Yeah, 80% of the people on my course wanted to become a corporate lawyer, and everyone saw suits, etc.
Because it's seen as glamorous.
It's glamorized. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Is it glamorous?
To a point.
Do you get chauffeured around in Mercedes all the time?
Maybachs.
And I could just expense it.
Oh, it's nice to know. But 80% of the people started the degree with me. They started with this ambition to become corporate lawyers.
Yeah.
And then you go into the third year, the last year of the university, and you ask the same people, so do you still want to do corporate law?
Yeah.
And probably more than half of them, they'll just be alienated with the idea of becoming corporate lawyers.
But is that because they couldn't get vaccines at top firms or what?
No, it's not. It's because the people. So the people I spoke to, they're quite intellectual people. They could they've got the vacation schemes already, and they could apply for the training contracts. But it's when you do the modules on corporate law and you realise, could I do?
Oh, but law school is nothing like law.
Yeah, but that's what they push it off as. So when you go to
but that's silly though, because what you should do is take your experience from the VAC schemes and the applications and the interactions that you have.
And people do that as well. So I did.
Do you think also it's a little bit of like, I know, like, you know, especially in university, people tend to be very left wing, and you hate these big corporations.
Yes.
And why do they have money? And then
like Muhammad Amin said when he was in university, he was a Trotskyist.
Yes,
and look at him now. He's a conservative for him.
Assad is basically a socialist, semi-communist now.
Give like 5 years,
totally different. 10 years later, he's going to.
That's why, like,
and be like, forget taxes.
So like how I felt in undergrad, it informed my decision to do a master's in security and international law, instead of going down the traditional route of LPC and the training contract, because I didn't think I was ready to do that myself. It's not something I just like I'd show off for the rest of my life. I think I'm never going to do that because I support the people, the masses. It's
forget the masses.
Forget the masses, but I need that money. That Netflix subscription don't pay for itself. You know what I mean? But that's something I'd hold on to the side because personally I do think, and me and a lot of other law students, it's don't really like the corporate world. It's probably because I was portrayed.
So my view on that is that being a corporate lawyer is a good job in the sense that fundamentally, okay, it's long hours and it's kind of stressful, but not really. It depends on the level you're at, I guess. But fundamentally, you get paid well. You're in very comfortable offices. You get treated very well because law firms understand that you are the asset. They don't
You're
have
the cog in the machine,
other than people, and they charge you out. You are you're the equivalent of like an iPhone for Apple, right? So they are going to treat you very well because they have to. And there are things that you can do that you just can't do in other professions, I guess. So, for example, in my office, if I need to meet someone, I can just duck out at whatever time and just have that meeting. I can take a call whenever I want. I can do whatever I want. It's all quite flexible in the sense that as long as I'm doing the work that I need to do, then everything's fine.
So, like, with lawyers, you see this kind of thing about there's so much paperwork to do. Do you do the paperwork, or do the trainees do the paperwork?
What do you mean by paperwork?
So, like, all the mundane tasks.
All the
filling in forms,
all the micros, all-nighters that he pulls off with paralegals. In
the bullpen, just sitting there, just writing, and then they give the report.
Well, it'll be typing and typing and typing for a start.
Modernization.
To be honest with you, I think you'd be surprised once if you do ever choose to go down this path, that in a sense, I kind of miss the trainee days of just like churning documents. Because it's quite mindless, isn't it? You get paid, a decent sum of money as a trainee, and you're just churning out stuff that's quite mindless. It's all right, isn't it?
Is it? Even watching Suits and watch them do it, I'll just get bored. Like,
but it goes back to my point of it depends what you want to do. So if your goal is I want to be a lawyer for the rest of my life, of course you want to get onto the intellectually stimulating stuff. You want to be drafting the really complex documents and doing a lot of the negotiation with the other side and all that sort of stuff, which is all well and good, and that's all fine. If you want to be a corporate lawyer for the rest of your life, I don't want to be a corporate lawyer for the rest of my life. So that's the difference.
Oh wow! So
did you know that when you took the GDL?
Yes. It's a completely pragmatic decision.
Okay.
This is the thing that I think we can have our ideals and principles and everything, but in practice, and this most Muslims, like most people, are making practical decisions because that's what happens in the real world.
Yeah.
And then
the problem you've got is that like you said, at kind of university, you might have these ideals and so on. You're making decisions based on these ideals that you might not even have in 5 or 10 years, and then it's like, oh, well, I should have thought about this at university because I could have set myself up really nicely to do this.
But you can always change around, and
of course you can. But much like I kind of started teaching and then pivoted. Of course you can always change things. But yeah, so to get back to the original point that I picked up on what you said about you should do what you enjoy and are passionate about, I just don't think it's as simple as that.
Because a lot of people are passionate about dance.
That's a very. That's a very. I think that's a bombshell to end on.
A lot of people are passionate about dance.
No. Forget that. No. Before that, which was that you don't just do something because you're passionate about it, especially at this time, because you may not be passionate about it in 5 years. And that's really deep. You can listen to us on YouTube, Spotify, Pocket Casts, Google Podcasts, YouTube. You can.
What do you think about Patreon? Because I was just thinking, then he was just saying all this, YouTube, Spotify, and all this.
Is Patreon the thing where you can donate or something?
So you have this kind of regular subscription thing, and the viewers tell you what to do. Not tell you what to do. They
basically
advise.
They become our patrons.
Yeah. The patrons for the.
Yeah. I thought Patreon was like a paid thing.
So
So people sponsor you and they become patrons of your project, whatever the project is.
Oh, but they kind of guide you.
And they can get a vote and stuff if you want. Yeah, so you can give them you can give them some input if you want, or they just like your content.
What guests would they want to see on the show, or what topics would they want us to cover?
Fundamentally, it sounds like a good idea. I think the way that we do it is probably quite different in the sense that we have like an email list and stuff like that, so we can always reach out to them directly.
I think because you're a corporate lawyer, you don't need any funds, so you're fine.
I don't know about that.
IFG, do you use your own money to get it started?
It doesn't need a lot of money, in the sense that it's just a website, isn't it?
Yeah. What's $200,000 to a corporate lawyer?
Nada.
I think that the thing that's really difficult is time.
Yeah,
that's the really valuable thing.
If only you could buy time, eh?
Indeed.
That's my next startup.
All right. That's what we're ending on. If only you could buy time. You can email us on middlewestpc@gmail.com, Twitter @themiddlewestpc, Facebook the Middle West PC as well. You can find Mohsin on Twitter, on IFG. He's Mohsin at islamicFinanceGuru.com.
Yep.
For direct email and any kind of advice or anything on finances. And also, they have their own podcast, Millionaire Muslim.
Yep, do check it out.
And hopefully we're having Ibrahim on as your peer in the in a very hopefully very quick follow-up episode.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. So jazakallah khair for your time.
Jazakallah khair, it's been a pleasure.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.